Truffle making! Yay, we're in our truffle making workshop today. So this is perfect if you are a home cook, if you're curious about chocolate and truffles, or just kind of curious to see what you can do, and also perfect if you love chocolate. I'm Rachel Waugh. I'm going to be teaching this class slash workshop. We actually are refilming this because our original version ended up with some technical difficulties. It didn't actually film the bowl while I was making truffles, and instead just filmed me trying to talk and cook at the same time. So lots of head down moments. So silliness, but we're gonna figure it out and have it live for you for next time. This workshop is all about chocolate, so we are going to start by making truffles, and I'll walk you through how to do that. And it's really just kind of the preparation process as we make the ganache. Next, we're going to go into the history and history and culture of chocolate, and then finally we'll wrap things up by making the truffles themselves, and of course eating. That's a natural part of it. So stick around, and apologies in advance for any shoddy editing. I'm not the best editor, but I will do my best. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you make some good truffles. All right, so the first thing that you want to do is get a microwave safe bowl and pour in about a half of a cup of milk. It can be any milk that you choose. In this case, I'm using oat milk. So pour that in, and then in this instance, I'm using a microwave. You can also use a double boiler or put it on directly on the stovetop. You're going to want to heat the milk to approximately a simmering or steaming point. Once the milk is out of the microwave and is at a good steaming point, you then add your additional ingredients. This is just the way that I do it. There are a bunch of different ways to make truffles, but I find this to be the easiest and lowest mess. So I'm measuring about a half teaspoon of cinnamon in. I then am also going to put in about a teaspoon or so of vanilla. And finally, a big old honkin' scoop of peanut butter. These are going to be peanut butter truffles. And actually later on, I'll end up adding more peanut butter. So stay tuned for that, just to get the flavor really out there. Once you add all of these ingredients in, I recommend giving it a good stir to mix to incorporate. If you're adding any nut butters or anything like jam-like, and it's not melting very well, I recommend that you just pop it back in the microwave for maybe another 20-30 seconds just to make sure that it is a good liquid amount and it is incorporated. So, all right, so now you have a steaming bowl of milk with all of the ingredients in there. So this is the point where I add my chocolate chips. Another way to make ganache is actually just to pour the steaming milk over chocolate chips. So I start out typically pretty small and conservative, and I'll add more and more chocolate chips in the end. I actually ended up using this entire bag, but I wanted to just make sure that you start getting the melting, because obviously as soon as you add the chocolate into the milk, it's going to lower the temperature of the milk itself. And again, mix to incorporate. You can see that the chocolate is already kind of starting to melt and get that kind of rich sheen to it. And that is one of the indicators of a good ganache. So the next step that you want to do is cool the ganache, and you want it to get to kind of a scoopable consistency. There are a bunch of different ways to do this. You can just pop the entire bowl of ganache into your fridge or freezer even to cool down for if you're doing the freezer, 15 to 20 minutes. If you're doing the fridge, about 30 to 40 minutes. And you really want that scoopable consistency. In this case, I'm trying to do it fast. So I'm actually putting little blobs of chocolate on a plate in advance, and because of the larger amount of surface area, hopefully they'll cool a lot faster and be easier to work with quicker. All right, so while our ganache is cooling down, chilling out, if you will, that's really bad. Sorry. We are going to talk about the history and culture of chocolate. Chocolate is one of those foods that I just love to think about because it connects so much of cultural and historical moments in time. And I think it's just like a really fascinating food to eat because it has this through line throughout history. So the first thing I want you guys to do is actually, if you will, hold out your hands in front of you as if you're holding a football end to end. So about 10 to 12 inches. So this is the size of a cacao pod. A cacao pod is also a little bit football in shape. I'll show you some images later. And the football shape has about 20 to 50 cacao seeds inside, and the seeds are what we use to make chocolate. And the chocolate making process actually is really pretty involved, but as we'll talk about, it gets really similar to some other foods that we see across different cultures and across different culinary practices. So how did people first use cacao? So cacao first has records of being used in ancient Mesoamerican by the Olmecs and the Mayans, and then eventually later on the Aztecs, about 2,000 years ago. So going back quite a bit. And just like today, people really enjoyed cacao, what now becomes chocolate, and they saw a huge amount of value in it. It was used during religious rituals, it was used in money, and then of course people consumed it. But so even though today we like know chocolate as, candy bars and chocolate chip cookies, back in the day in ancient Mesoamerica, people would actually drink the cacao. So the cacao was ground into kind of a liquid form, mixed with like a cornmeal mash. And then people would add chili peppers to add some spice and cinnamon to it. And it was consumed in drink form in this way. People did not have a solid bar of chocolate. So how come we eat chocolate bars today? So that is actually a relatively new thing in terms of historical timelines. And that is as recent as the 1800s. So up until this point, people were drinking chocolate, and they would drink it hot, they would drink it cold, they would add water to it. It was primarily a water-based drink. And then in the 1800s, you start to see some people adding some more milk and stuff to it. But during this time, the 1800s, around Industrial Revolution moments, you have this man named Joseph Fry who discovers a way to combine cocoa powder, just like what you have in your pantry to make hot chocolate, with sugar and then cacao, and then mold it into chocolate bars. And he was like, oh, this is a great idea. He created a company called Fry's and started making chocolate bars. Around this time, other companies started to follow his lead and started to incorporate milk and sugar into their chocolate bars. And this took off like gangbusters. Well, how is chocolate made? So this part is actually like the thing I find the most fascinating, because this has been something that people have been doing for not hundreds, but thousands and thousands of years. So 2,000 plus to be exact. So I wanted to talk about how chocolate is made. So earlier we did that activity where we held up the football. So when you're looking at this image, which is going to be on the left hand of your screen, that is the size of the cacao pod. So the cacao pod, again, is about the football shape, and it grows on the tree. You can see it just kind of like sprouting out there. And then that second picture is once you've cut the cacao pod open, you have these seeds, the cacao seeds, the cacao beans, covered in this like white kind of mucusy, like gooey uh, substance, and that is called baba. So when making chocolate for chocolate bars, chocolate chips, all that jazz, we leave the baba on. But sometimes the baba is separated and you can make it into chocolate wine or different drinks. So once you've left the baba on, the first step, I guess after harvesting and like cutting open, first step is going to be fermenting this. So there are a bunch of different ways to do this. Um, from what I learned, it seems like the most popular is to do this heaping method where you pile all the things on top of each other and then you let them heat each other up to ferment. So this is actually kind of similar. If you've ever done composting, similar process. So you're going to let it heat to really get the proper bacteria happy, jiving, and creating the food. The fermentation also gives it a good amount of flavor. And it gives it kind of that signature aroma as well with the richness. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to dry the beans. So typically, these beans are placed out on the ground in kind of these like flat stretches of areas, and they're dried for about 14 days. So the fermentation process takes about a week, which I forgot to mention. This part takes about a week to 2 weeks. So at this point, you're already 2 to 3 weeks into this process after you've harvested the beans. And the drying process also requires like some raking so that it just is getting really consistently dry and there's nothing lurking under there. It's not continuing to ferment. There's nothing moldy, all of that jazz. So the next step is roasting. Roasting is like coffee. So coffee and chocolate, you are roasting the beans to bring out this wonderful flavor. And roasting also for chocolate loosens the outer shell piece, which will make the next step a lot easier. This part you get like this wonderful aroma coming off of it, this wonderful flavor. And so you've got like raw cocoa beans don't actually end up tasting very much like chocolate, but the roasting stage is when it starts getting similar to what we know chocolate to be. The next piece, so this cracking winnowing stage, so basically you're taking off the hard shell of the beans, and this has been developed through like the fermentation, drying and roasting process. So you're taking that piece off. You end up with our cacao nibs. So next piece, again, and we're going like the whole way into making chocolate. The next piece is grinding the cacao nibs. On your left, you'll see a traditional metate, which is how people would grind the beans in ancient Mesoamerica, and still to this day, people do this process. And what you do, if you've ever ground like spices or anything without a food processor, you're going to take like a handful of those cacao nibs that have already gone through the rest of the stages, stick them in the middle of the metate, and start rolling it by hand. And so you're going to need to go, back and forth like 20, 30 times before it even gets to have kind of a liquidy state. Nowadays, with the industrial process, like commercial chocolate or chocolate that you would buy commercially, like when you're at the grocery store or if you're a chef, those have been ground typically by industrial grinders and conch machines. And so the grinders are going to kind of heat up the chocolate and really get it to like emit all of this flavor. All right, next process is conching. So many organizations now have kind of a combo of a conching and grinding machine, but the conching is a specific process where you're basically like rolling, kneading, heating, and aerating the cocoa beans. So at this point, the chocolate is liquidy, and you've got this machine that's like stirring it and smoothing it under heat. And so this really makes kind of the consistency of the bar of chocolate. So earlier I said that like different cacao seeds can taste different, even within the same cacao pod. This is what's going to give it kind of that consistency. If you're doing single or final step is tempering. So we actually didn't temper. Oh my God. Okay, so the final step, that was Piper. Final step is tempering the chocolate. So chocolate needs to be tempered, and this is basically ensuring that the crystals of your cocoa butter are reestablished. So chocolate tempering is a specific heat process where you're basically changing the texture of the chocolate. What you're doing in practice is you're heating up the chocolate and then bringing it down, and you're heating it to this specific temperature and then bringing it down to a specific temperature so that you're able to work with it, yes, and also so that when you have that final bar of chocolate, especially if you're making chocolate bars or if you're doing any hard shell truffles, you get that like shininess to the chocolate. You also will get a much smoother texture, a sturdy texture. You're going to get a nice snap when you break it. If chocolate is not tempered well or accurately, they will have kind of like a waxy look to them. And it'll still taste good. You can totally eat it. But it'll also have like a crumbly texture. It's not quite as pleasant as the tempered chocolate. And so kind of that's the final piece of this process. And there are a couple different ways to temper chocolate. We're not doing that in this workshop because that honestly just takes forever. And making hard shell truffles can take a really long time, but that is how but you would temper traditionally chocolate if you're making a chocolate bar or oh my God, hard shell truffles. That's what they're called. Is that what they're called? One second. That's what I've been calling them, and I'm actually not, I can't remember. Yes, it is hard shell truffles. I mean, they're also called truffles, but that's kind of the ones where you bite in, and then there's the ganache. Right now we're just doing straight up ganache because they're a lot easier and you can do them a lot faster. And also they're still delicious, so like, woo. All right. If you're curious about tempering, like, let's do it. This can be for the outtakes, maybe. So if you're curious about tempering, there are a couple different ways to do it. My favorite method is you heat the chocolate, usually in a double boiler, which means you've got steam at the bottom, water boiling at the bottom, and then like a glass bowl or an actual double boiler on top with the chocolate inside, and you're using that to kind of gently heat the chocolate. It helps it not burn, and it helps kind of control the temperature because you're using the steam instead of direct heat to heat it. You're going to get that to a very specific temperature, which honestly right now I cannot remember. You get that to a specific temperature, then you pull it off the heat, and then you do what is called the seeding method. And so the seeding method is when you're adding chocolate chips, more chocolate chips to the chocolate as you stir really quickly to reduce the temperature. So this is different than what we did because we're not using milk to melt it, and so it's not going to have that kind of glossy, it's not going to have the same type of glossy sheen to it. If you do the two, they'll seem really different. But that is the seeding method. You're using that chocolate to bring down the temperature. And then you actually end up raising it back up just a smidge to get it to that perfect temperature. There's a traditional way too for like French chocolatiers. I believe this is more French at least. I've seen it more with French chocolatiers, and that is tabling method. And so that's typically when you have like this large marble slab, and you pour the melted chocolate onto the marble slab after you've already done the double boiler and everything, and then you just kind of push it around with these metal slats. Yes, like a dance. And you push it around, and you're using the air itself and the coolness of the marble to bring the chocolate temperature down. You're using like the fact that it has surface area, that the air is cooling, all that jazz. And then at the end, you scoop it all off the marble table back, or the marble slab back into a bowl and heat it up. I've used it like a heat gun to do that heating back up process. So those are kind of two of the most common different ways to do it. And honestly, I prefer the seating method at home, at least, because I don't own just a random marble slab. And it's a lot easier, and I get to add more chocolate, so like always good. So that is that whole process. All right, so one thing that I really love doing is a chocolate tasting activity. So we all like chocolate, we all smell chocolate, yum, yum, yum. But how many of us really take the time to sit with the chocolate? So I'm going to do kind of an abbreviated chocolate tasting that's just calling your attention to the differences of kind of the chocolate flavor and everything that you have. If you have a couple different types of chocolate, this can be a really good opportunity to taste different types of chocolate next to each other and see the differences. I would actually recommend pausing here. If you didn't pause, we're just gonna hop right in, or if you're coming back, hi. So the first thing that I want you to do with the chocolate chip, and this can feel a little funky if you've never done a tasting event before, but I really want you to concentrate on smell. So close your eyes and smell the chocolate. It sometimes helps if you have a number of them in your hand. So probably smells sweet, probably smells like chocolate. See if you can dig a little bit deeper. Are there any nutty notes coming through? Do you smell walnuts or almonds, or is it maybe more of a fruit type smell and you're getting like some sweetness to it, and maybe it's almost like a raspberry or a strawberry type note? Or maybe there's something almost bitter about it. It's reminding you of coffee or tea or wine even. So just take a moment, smell, pause. All right. And then when you're ready, open your eyes. All right, so now this is the part that I recommend you do with just like one chocolate chip. So take a minute and we're just going to notice the chocolate chip. So notice like the peak to base ratio. Notice if there are any irregularities. Is it kind of dusty looking? Like, is it very, very shiny? Just take a moment to notice. Are there any bumps? Is it melting in your hand? Awesome. All right, and then finally, my favorite part, taste. So I recommend doing this with one first, and then if you need to replay this part and do it with the second, go for it. So the taste part, I want you to just take one chocolate chip and stick it on your tongue, and you're going to let it melt on your tongue. So sometimes this can also be easier if you're doing it with your eyes closed, but just take a moment, notice what 5 tastes are coming out for you. So again, like with the smell, it probably tastes like chocolate, probably tastes a little bit sweet, unless you are someone who loves 100% chocolate, and go for you. But take a little bit of time, notice the 5 tastes. So in addition to the sweet, the sugar, are you noticing any bitterness? Are you noticing any umami, kind of that fatty flavor that comes with like Parmesan cheese and beef jerky and tomatoes and mushrooms? Are you noticing any sourness? I actually had a chocolate chip yesterday when I was doing this activity for the first time that was really sour, and I was quite surprised. Kind of reminded me of grapefruit. So once you've identified the 5 tastes and you've just kind of called your attention to each of them, and bitter and salty are the other 2, then I want you to think about the notes that you're getting. So similar to smell, are you getting any nuttiness from it? Are you getting any fruitness from it? Are you noticing that it tastes kind of earthy, like maybe kind of like a soil, a rich beet, or like you're just eating a fresh tomato leaf or something. uh, these notes might come out. And if you do this with a second chocolate chip, which I highly recommend just because extra eating chocolate too, you really can start to notice the differences between flavors. So I always love doing this because then I get to figure out which are my favorite chocolate chips. Not just because they're chocolate chips. I don't go to the store and just be like, let's get chocolate chips. But instead I'm like, oh, I know that this brand I super duper love. I love the flavor of it. So just spend some time letting that melt on your tongue. Notice how quickly it's melting or not melting. Maybe it's already gone. I don't know. Notice the size, like play with it a little bit on your tongue. And then come back here. Cool. All right. So thanks guys for doing the chocolate activity. I always like the tasting activity because I think it helps just like really ground you in the moment. And as I said, I use this when trying new foods, and it's not just chocolate. I'll try this. I've tried this with cheese before. I've done this with potato chips. Granted, I am a food nerd, so it comes with the territory, but I promise you, if you do this over time and try different chocolates, you'll actually start to find chocolates that you enjoy more, and you'll purchase chocolate bars that you enjoy more and all that. So try it out, see what you think, and keep tasting. All right, so people use a lot of different terms to discuss their chocolate, and they can be kind of confusing and sound the same, and then they're not the same, and then you're like, I just want a bar of chocolate. So I wanted to talk about them here because I think they're kind of interesting in terms of understanding your purchasing choices. Chocolate is pretty similar to other foods, other commodities. So this might just help you like purchase things going forward in general. But I wanted to talk about it specifically for chocolate. So people refer to chocolate in terms of single origin, fair or direct trade, and then they also talk about organic. So what does that mean though? So most chocolates today come from a variety of small farms around the world. And the cacao at each farm tastes pretty unique. And the cacao beans, even from the same pod, can taste different. This is actually really similar to olive oil. It's similar to wine, beer, cheese even, where you have this taste of place. It's called terroir. And terroir is basically how something tastes and how it's been affected by its environment. A lot of different things go into terroir, and people are still figuring out cool things. One of the components is like the soil science. What is the soil pH of where you're growing, the grapes for wine or the cacao pods? Some of it has to do with rainfall or other weather, like freezes, stuff like that. Some of it can even have to do with like pruning. So a lot of different changes around that. And so single origin is telling you that whatever is in your chocolate bar or chocolate chips, they all came from the same farm. They all came from the same small holding of a farm. So it is going to have a much more distinct taste than some of your other larger companies that kind of pool all of their purchases in together and then melt it down and get it all happy, hunky-dory so that there's more of a standardized taste across the board. In terms of fair and direct trade, so not all farms pay their workers fairly or treat them well. So fair trade tells you that the farmers were paid fairly. All of the small holding farms enter into kind of this like collective that is the Fair Trade Federation. And they have a standard rate that they are paid, a standard level of treatment. On the other hand, direct trade is a direct agreement on practices between the chocolate makers and the individual smallholding farms, the producers. So direct trade actually gives the smallholding farms a lot more negotiating power, a lot more say in how much they're paid, and it takes out the middleman of the federation, and the producers are going to be paid probably a bit more than in fair trade agreements. Both of them, I think, are good. Direct trade is how you know, though, that the majority of your money is going to be going to the producers. And then finally, organic chocolate. So organic chocolate, it just tells you that they didn't use pesticides when growing the cacao. And pesticides in food in general can lead to health problems for the farm workers and can also hurt nearby animals and plants. Cacao is not one of the foods that you really need to pay attention to in terms of pesticide residue, but it's just, again, contributing to that like good labor practices standard. All right, so pulling the truffles out of the fridge. So you can see they're all blobular. That's not a real word, but it's kind of word. Okay, so this is always like a little bit hard to kind of get off, but I still find it easier than using 800 bowls. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just rolling them into little ball shapes and setting them aside, and just wanting to get them kind of in the same size shape. This will be our end amount of truffle. So I'm using the heat of my hand to reshape these. I'll show you what it looks like if you're doing kind of a scoopable version where you just put the entire bowl in, but this is the way that this works. As you can see, the plate's getting kind of messy, and that's totally fine. I'm just doing a very simple cocoa powder rub for these. So I have an extra plate, and what I'm going to do is I take the balls that I just rolled, and I'm just going to coat them in that cocoa powder. And as soon as I've finished a plate worth of them, I'm going to pop them back in the fridge just to cool off a little bit. Make sure that they retain their shape and they're fully solid truffles. You can also play some truffle hockey with yourself if you'd like. So if you're scooping, it's a pretty similar method. Basically, what you're going to do is take a tablespoon or a teaspoon. You're going to scoop out a bit. I usually just put it right into my hands because I'll need the warmth to roll it a little bit. I'll add some more cocoa powder so that I can properly roll them in the cocoa powder exterior, and I just roll them around into a ball, put them in. Either way is totally fine. I just found that I really liked kind of the little plonk method that you saw earlier, just because it's easier and I don't have to do quite as much. Editing Rachel here. I realized I totally forgot to do a thank you video, so thank you for sticking around. I hope you made truffles at the same time as I did and that they turned out beautiful. Mine are already super delicious. I definitely broke into them. And feel free to message me if you have any questions with the method, with what you learned today. I'd love to hear from you. And the roundtable will be voting for the January workshop early next month. So make sure to join the roundtable community. And I hope you like this video. We hope to see you again at our next workshop. Thanks. Bye.